Hello! Hello, chat. How are we all doing today? My day was pretty uneventful. I mean, aside from the fact that I watched MCC, got sad that the team I was rooting for didn't win, but it is what it is. I'm happy with the placement they got, and I'm glad they all had fun. Now today I was thinking, it's been a while since I've read Tommyinnit's Clinic for Supervillains, and we left on a pretty intense chapter. Tommy found out that his roommates, Rambu and Tubbo, are the vigilantes Nuke and Ender, and Rambu and Tubbo found out that Tommy has been healing supervillains for money. The money part wasn't originally his idea. Neither really was the healing supervillains thing. But he's willingly doing it, so. And where we left off, Tommy got in a pretty big fight with his roommates. And so he called Wilbur to see if he can help him. And I think he's going to stay over at Wilbur's. So let's see how that goes, eh? There's 26 chapters to this, so we're almost halfway through. God, I'm not gonna be okay when this ends. Like, I'm not gonna be emotionally okay, and I could feel it. Let's see. Chapter 12. Oh, and this story is by Bones and the Bees. I'm fairly certain that's also their Twitter handle, so go show some support to the author. Chapter 12. Hot Chocolate. Summary. After his fight with his roommates, Tommy tries to take some time to recover at Wilbur's. Trigger warnings for this chapter: graphic depictions of a head injury, or descriptions of a head injury. Sure enough, when Tommy arrived at Wilbur's house, there were 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate waiting for them on the kitchen counter. Tommy didn't need to say much, and for that he was so unbelievably grateful. Techno only said a brief hello to him as he rinsed out the pot he'd used to make the hot chocolate, before leaving him and Wilbur alone as he disappeared up the stairs. Wilbur didn't push him to talk either, just shoved the mug in Tommy's hands before he started to rummage through the kitchen cabinets, asking Tommy if he'd gotten the chance to eat dinner. The hot chocolate was rich and warm, and although there was still a hollow aching in his chest, it made it feel like the hole was filled for just a moment. Although Tommy hadn't actually gotten a chance to eat dinner, he told Wilbur he had, simply because he knew he wasn't going to be able to stomach anything more than the sweet drink tonight. He let the hot chocolate work its way through him as he rested his fingers against the granite counters, watching Wilbur flit around the kitchen, buzzing with nervous energy. It was clear that he was worried about Tommy, but didn't want to push him to talk if he didn't want to. In the end, despite telling Wilbur that he'd eaten dinner, he still ended up with a slice of peanut butter toast sitting in front of him. "I told you I ate," Tommy said, his fingers still clutching the hot chocolate mug as tightly as he could. Although his tears had stopped long ago, his voice was rough, and he winced at the sound. "Yeah, you said you ate before your shift. Normally you eat again after your shift, which I know you didn't this time because that's when you had your fight, so you need something to tie you over." Wilbur explained, resting his elbows on the counter in front of him. Damn it. Damn Wilbur and his annoying tendency to actually pay attention to all the rambling nonsense that falls out of Tommy's mouth. Not hungry, Tommy mumbled, pushing the plate away. Wilbur frowned and pushed the plate back towards him. You don't have to eat all of it. Just a few bites. It'll make you feel better, I promise. How do you know? Tommy asked, voice growing sharper as frustration flared inside him. Because in all the time we've been friends, this is the first time I've ever seen you turn down food, Wilbur said, not reacting to the bite in his words. Just a few bites. That's all I'm asking for. Tommy glared at Wilbur, but he knew the silent protest wasn't going to work. Wilbur could be a stubborn bitch when he wanted to, and clearly this was going to be one of those times. Flipping him off with one hand, Tommy lifted up the toast with the other and took a small bite from the corner. The peanut butter was sweet, but not too sweet, pairing nicely with the nuts and seeds in the bread itself. I'm sorry. Wilbur has the bread with nuts and seeds in it? I dislike Wilbur's character in this story now. The only right way to eat bread is white bread. And no, I will not be accepting any other answer. As soon as he swallowed the first bite, his stomach seemed to wake up all at once, as if suddenly remembering how little food he'd had that day. Next thing he knew, he'd eaten the entire piece of toast, and Wilbur was giving him a knowing smirk. Fuck off, Tommy grumbled, pushing the crumb-covered plate back towards him. Thank you, Wilbur replied, taking the plate and rinsing it off in the sink. As loath as Tommy was to admit it, he did actually feel a bit better after eating the toast. His head still ached from his crying, and there was still a painful seize in his chest every time he remembered the betrayal in Tubbo's eyes as they screamed at each other, but the gnawing anxiety in his gut had lessened. You done with that? Wilbur asked, pointing to the hot chocolate mug still in Tommy's hands. Glancing down, Tommy realized the cup was empty and nodded. All right, I'll clean it out later, Wilbur said, taking the mug from him and putting it in the sink. Let's go upstairs so you can get settled in the guest room. Tommy followed Wilbur up the many flights of stairs to the third floor, and instead of opening the door to his own room like he usually did when Tommy came over, this time, Wilbur opened the door to the room across from his own. The room itself was a similar size to Wilbur's, if possibly a bit smaller. There was a double bed settled next to the window with plain white blankets, along with a dresser and a desk. Unlike Wilbur's room, the guest room was perfectly clean, with no clothes scattered anywhere and walls that were bare of any peeling posters. Wilbur left Tommy alone in the room as he went to his own bedroom to grab some clothes for Tommy to borrow, and Tommy took the opportunity to drop his backpack on the floor before collapsing onto the bed. It was a large bed, much larger than the one they had back home. In fact, Tommy was pretty sure Rambu might even be able to completely fit on this bed instead of having his feet hang off. Hell, they could probably fit all three of them on this thing and no one would even end up on the floor in the morning. Maybe one day, Tommy could bring Tubbo and Rambu. He cut that thought off before it could fully form. Right now, it would be a miracle if Tommy got the opportunity to even stay in his own apartment again. For all he knew, Tubbo and Rambu could be throwing his stuff out the window right now. No, they wouldn't do that. Even though this was one of the worst fights they ever had, Tommy had to be honest with himself. No matter how pissed they were at each other, they would never kick Tommy out. As if on cue, there was a buzzing from Tommy's phone, and he clenched his jaw as he pulled it out of his pocket. Tubbo, where are you? We just got back and you're not here. Great. Yeah, of course they were going to want to know where Tommy was. After all, they'd been under the assumption Tommy was going to go back to the apartment, and they would resume their screaming match in the comfort of their own home. Tommy, fuck off, I'm staying at Will's tonight. Tommy watched the 3 dots appear after his text was sent, only to disappear as Tubbo stopped typing his response. The dots reappeared and disappeared a few more times, until finally Tubbo sent a reply. Fine. Yeah, okay. He should have expected that. Sighing, Tommy tossed his phone back onto the bed, right as Wilbur re-entered the room. Without waiting for acknowledgement, Wilbur dropped a pile of fabric onto Tommy's lap, and Tommy quickly realized it was a sweater and sweatpants. They might be a bit big on you, but they'll work for pajamas, Wilbur explained. Tommy scoffed. You're not much taller than me, bitch. I am too, Wilbur shot back, smirking at him. Usually, a joke like that would fire Tommy up. It would egg him on, make him want to yell and curse Wilbur out while trying to prove how much of a big man he was. But even with a full stomach and the warmth from the hot chocolate chasing away the chill in his bones, he couldn't bring himself to summon up the energy for that. Wilbur seemed to realize this at the same moment Tommy did, because his smile faded, and he slowly sat down on the edge of the bed next to Tommy. Sorry, that was my dog. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I'm here to listen if you need it, he offered gently. Tommy winced, digging his nails into his palm. Surprisingly, a part of him wanted to talk to Wilbur about what was going on. He felt like everything he'd known had been yanked out from underneath his feet, and he was spiraling to try and find something solid to hold on to. He wanted to ask Wilbur for his advice, to listen to his calming voice reassure him that everything was going to be okay. But he couldn't betray Tubbo and Rambu like that. Even if they lied to him, even if they didn't trust him anymore, he wasn't going to give up their identities to anyone. I can't talk about it, Tommy whispered, staring at his hands in his lap. That's okay, Wilbur reassured, nudging Tommy's shoulder with his own. I know it seems like the end of the world right now, but I'm sure there's going to be a day in the future where you're going to look back at this fight and laugh at how dumb the 3 of you were. Tommy wanted to believe him. He really did. But this was so much more than any of the other dumb fights he'd had with his 2 best friends before. They were dealing with serious shit, life and death situations. Tommy doubted this kind of betrayal was something that he'd ever be able to laugh about. His anxious thoughts made the ache in his chest come back tenfold. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell his 2 best friends over and over again how badly they hurt him until his voice went hoarse. He wanted a hug. Tommy pulled Wilbur into a bone-crushing hug without warning, the older man grunting in surprise, but not trying to pull away. Tommy buried his face in Wilbur's shoulder, squeezing his eyes shut with the vain hope that maybe, just maybe, he could hide away from the rest of the world and all his problems, at least for tonight. Warm arms wrapped around his back, pulling him closer as Tommy took a shaky breath. The hand came up to card through Tommy's hair, and stuttering heartbeat began to slow. I didn't think fuck up this badly," he admitted, his muffled voice cracking from where his face is pressed against Wilbur's sweater. It was supposed to be the three of us against the world. I never thought they'd take me out of that." "I know it hurts," Wilbur whispered, fingers working to gently untangle a knot in Tommy's hair. "But broken trust can be repaired. It can take a while, but when it comes to family, you can always make an effort to glue back together what's been shattered." Tommy nodded into Wilbur's shoulder. He had to believe that things weren't completely fucked between him and the only two people he'd ever considered family. That things would be okay. That night, Tommy's sleep was restless. Although his bed was more comfortable, it felt far too empty without either Tubbo or Rambu to share it with. He tossed and turned until the curtains turned grey in the morning light. Tommy wondered if Tubbo and Rambu were having the same problems. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Tommy's boredom rose as well. Although it was still hours before the time he usually got up for the day, considering he couldn't sleep, there wasn't much point in staying in bed. Tommy crept out of the guest room, watching his footsteps to make sure he didn't wake Wilbur in his own room. Then, he padded down the stairs as softly as he could, sighing in relief when he finally reached the first floor. His eyes were half-lidded as he trudged to the kitchen, struggling to remember if Wilbur had ever told him how to work the damn coffee machine. Turns out, he didn't need to remember. "Hey mate, you up early?" Tommy jumped at the voice, his shoulders dropping when he met Phil's pale blue gaze. "Shit, you scared me," Tommy muttered, wrapping his arms around himself and leaning against the counter. The clothes Wilbur had given him to sleep in were, in fact, too big. The blue sweater Tommy wore covered his hands when he didn't push up the sleeves, and his feet were completely swallowed by the fabric of the sweatpants. Still, the clothes were soft, and when he folded his arms in front of his chest, he was impossibly warm. "Sorry, usually I'm the only one up at this hour," Phil told him, giving him an apologetic smile. "Do you want some coffee? I just brewed a pot." "Oh, thank fucking God." "Yes, please," Tommy immediately replied. He must have looked desperate because Phil chuckled. "I shouldn't be surprised that you would look like you'd die without caffeine since you work at a coffee shop," he said as he took a mug out of the cabinet before pouring some of the coffee from the pot into it. Steam curled from the top, and Phil pushed it over to Tommy. "You take it with cream and sugar?" "Both, please." A few minutes later, Tommy was sitting at the kitchen counter with his coffee cup in hand. Phil was leaning against the opposite counter, sipping at his own drink and occasionally glancing out the window above the sink. Outside, Tommy could see shades of orange and pink streaking across the sky. "You know, Will's really happy you asked to stay here," Phil said out of the blue after minutes of silence. Tommy blinked. "What do you mean?" "He was just glad that you thought to call him when you needed someone. He's a bit of a sap like that." The older man chuckled. "I know it doesn't seem like it, but he can get pretty insecure about his relationships with people sometimes. It's kind of why he's such a clingy shit. It's reassuring for him." Wilbur? Insecure? The two ideas didn't seem like they could coexist in Tommy's head. Wilbur was the opposite of insecure. He was able to talk to people so easily, even able to coax Tommy out from just a relationship built on banter and teasing into an actual friendship. "Seriously?" "Yeah, seriously." He set his mug down and smiled at Tommy. "I just figured it's something you should know. If he ever starts ever being pissy or looking stressed, just remind him how much you care about him. It helps him a lot. Oh. Phil was telling him this because he wanted to help Tommy be a better friend to Wilbur. That made sense, and Tommy was surprisingly grateful for that. Okay, I think I get it, Tommy muttered, taking another sip of his coffee. Thank you. You're a good kid, Tommy, Phil said, the emerald in his ear glittering as it caught a ray of sunlight from the window. If you ever need a break from Will's clinginess, though, you're welcome to come find me in my office. I know we haven't spoken as much as you've spoken to Will and Tech, but I'd like to think I'm not too bad to hang out with. Staring down into the swirling shades of almond in his cup, Tommy tried to ignore the lump in his throat. Phil was being so kind to him. Wilbur had already been so unbelievably caring towards him. This family, they were good people. What would they think if they knew that Tommy saved the lives of murderers? Would they even agree that even villains deserved medical treatment? Or would they react like Tubbo and Rambu, only seeing things in shades of black and white? Tommy wanted to think it was the earlier one, but after Tubbo and Rambu, he didn't trust his judgment of what people might think. Thanks, Tommy said quietly, although he wasn't sure if he'd ever actually work up enough courage to knock on Phil's office door. He still appreciated the offer anyway. The rest of the morning passed by in a soft kind of tranquility. Phil made pancakes for breakfast, adding in an extra heaping of chocolate chips for Tommy's sake. While Tommy was in the middle of eating his second pancake, Techno made his way into the kitchen, looking as though he'd been awake for hours. In contrast, when Tommy was finishing his fourth pancake, Wilbur shuffled in, looking as though he'd just come off the set of a zombie movie. It turned out that Wilbur couldn't function in the morning without caffeine, and now it was starting to make sense why he usually had so many shots of espresso in his lattes. The conversation over the breakfast table was kept light, without anyone questioning why Tommy was there. Wilbur must have told Phil and Techno not to ask Tommy about it, and while he was grateful for that, it was also a bit annoying to feel like he was being treated as if he were made of glass. Then again, he was made of glass, wasn't he? At least right now. Everything felt so raw after the night before, and Tommy couldn't help but check his phone every few minutes on the off chance one of his roommates tried to text him, although neither of them did. After breakfast, Wilbur dragged Tommy to the living room where they both collapsed into a heap on the couch. Wilbur turned on another animated movie, this one about a teenage witch who had to go live on her own for a year. There was one part in particular where the girl stopped being able to do magic, and it wasn't until she took pressure off herself and spent time with the people that cared about her that her magic returned. What movie's that? Is it a Disney? Is it Raya? I haven't seen Raya, so... Did Tommy side-eye Wilbur when that part came up? Yes. Did Wilbur acknowledge it? No. But Tommy had no doubt the bastard knew what he was doing with the movie choice. Although it didn't exactly apply to his own situation, it was close enough to where Tommy got the message anyway. The day trickled by like sand through an hourglass. He and Wilbur didn't speak much, except to comment on the things that they were watching together. It was honestly really nice to just spend a day lounging on the couch, letting his worries drift instead of leaving them to fester at the forefront of his mind. However, Tommy still had work. When the time came for Tommy to leave for his shift, Wilbur gave him his own clothes back. Apparently Phil had washed them, and offered to give him a ride to the cafe. I don't think I want to have another near-death experience with you behind the wheel, Tommy teased, dumping Wilbur's pajamas onto the guest bed after having changed back into his own. Aw, come on, it wasn't that bad, Wilbur argued. Tommy raised an eyebrow. You hit, like, 3 curbs. I'm honestly amazed we didn't pop a tire. God, you're so dramatic. You sound exactly like techno, Wilbur scoffed, pouting at him. Because we both know you can't drive for shit, Tommy shot back, grinning at him. Seriously though, it's fine. I can take the train, no problem. Wilbur sighed. Okay, if you're sure you're alright with that. I'm not a baby, Wilbur. I can take the train by myself, Tommy told him, although there was no heat behind the words. Besides, you've done more than enough to help me out. That made Wilbur's eyebrows furrow. Thomas, I was happy to let you come over, and I was really glad you thought to call me in the first place. Don't feel like I'm doing you a favor or anything. I want to help you. Biting his lip, Tommy glanced at the ground. Sure, Wilbur was probably telling the truth, but Tommy couldn't help but feel like a burden. Wilbur had picked him up from the cafe in the middle of the night, made him dinner, gave him extra clothes, and spent the entire next day with him just because he was upset. Even if Wilbur didn't seem to think so, he was still doing Tommy a huge favor, and Tommy didn't want to be more of a bother than he already was. I should really get going, Tommy said, instead of addressing what Wilbur told him. But thank you, Will, for everything. Wilbur looked like he wanted to argue, but Tommy stepped forward to hug him before he got the chance. Wilbur immediately returned the hug, squeezing him tightly and lessening the pain in Tommy's chest. I'll see you soon, okay? Wilbur said, smiling hopefully at him. Yeah, sounds good, Tommy replied, giving Will his own weak smile in return. It actually wasn't that difficult to take the train back over to East Side so he could get to his shift on time. There was a station near the said house, and despite the afternoon rush stifling the air and making it difficult to breathe, it was a relatively peaceful commute. Falling back into the routine of his evening shift was comforting for Tommy. He was able to shut his mind off, to not think about what was waiting for him when he went home after the cafe closed, and instead focus on grinding beans and steeping tea. Wilbur didn't stop by that night, which was understandable given Tommy had spent the entire day with the man. Still, he found himself jumping every time the door chimed with a new customer, his heart skipping a beat as he wondered who he was going to see walk in. Tubba and Rambu had been to the cafe before, but it was a rare occurrence. Tommy didn't think either of them would show up during his shift, but he couldn't help his nerves, his eyes skimming the windows outside the cafe for any glimpse of bleached or black and white hair. As night fell, the rush slowed, and Tommy checked his phone more and more often. He wasn't sure if he wanted his roommates to text him, or if he was dreading the idea. As much as he hated this waiting game of wondering how their confrontation was going to go, he was also terrified of what was actually going to be said when it happened. He had no idea they were going to be able to work things out between them, or if it was going to lead to another screaming match. Drink break. In all honesty, Tommy wasn't sure if he was even ready to think about forgiving the two of them. Even if they did apologize, which he doubted they would, it wouldn't be something he could accept right away. Along with that, he wasn't ready to apologize either. While he knew he shouldn't have lied to his friends, he also wasn't completely in the wrong, and he had good reasoning for what he did. If Tubbo and Rumbu were expecting an apology from him, well, they might be waiting a while on that. His shift came to an end without much fanfare, and the dread that had been curling in Tommy's gut with every passing hour grasped him by the throat. There was no more putting it off now. He had to go home. Maybe he went through the closing routine a bit slower than usual, but no one could prove it. And maybe as he started the walk home, he dragged his feet a bit more than necessary, but no one was around to call him out on it. The night air was cool against his flushed cheeks, and he took deep breaths to calm his racing heart as he got closer and closer to his apartment building. Anxiety fluttered in his stomach, and when he took a deep breath to steady himself, he was hit with the sour stench of burnt rubber from the road. Ah, city living. Tommy was almost halfway back to his apartment when a shrill alert rang out from his phone. Nearly jumping out of his skin, Tommy stopped dead in his tracks and pulled out his cell phone to see what was going on. There was an emergency alert blaring across his screen, and as soon as Tommy read what it was, he felt his mouth go dry. Safety alert. Heroes Dream, Flame, and Rewind currently engaged with Siren, Blade, and Nemesis in the warehouse district of South Bay. Avoid the area if possible. Collateral damage to be expected. There was a button below the alert reporting live news footage, and Tommy tapped on it immediately. It took a second for his phone to load the video, but as soon as it did, his eyes went wide. A news helicopter seemed to be circling a warehouse roof, where 6 figures were all engaged in different kinds of battle. Blade was battling Dream, the villain expertly matching the blows of the 3 floating swords Dream was using to attack him. Siren was fighting Rewind. Siren was fighting Rewind, the time-manipulating hero dodging every single blow Siren tried to use on him, and covering his ears before Siren could even get a single charm-spoken word out. And then there was Nemesis. She had Flame pinned against what looked like some kind of water tower on the roof, but she wasn't pinning him physically. It was clear he couldn't move, but Nemesis was standing a few feet away, holding her hands out in front of her like she did when she was manipulating water. She's bloodbending. Nemesis lifted one arm, and Flame's arm lifted in mirror to it. Then she lifted her other arm, and Flame's arm did the same. Bile rose in Tommy's throat as he thought of how reminiscent it was of a puppet being pulled on by invisible strings. She was using her blood control again. Holy shit. Rewind seemed to realize what was happening because he tried to sprint over to the corner of the roof Nemesis and Flame were at, but he wasn't able to take 2 steps before Siren physically tackled him to the ground, and the two started to wrestle to try and pin the other down. Nemesis didn't even seem to notice the attempted attack. Her icy gaze was focused on Flame, and as she reached up her hand again, Tommy noticed her hand begin to curl in, as if it was wrapping around a throat. Flame coughed, trying to grab at his throat but struggling to move his arms. Nemesis didn't falter, her hand curling in further and further as she presumably compressed the blood flow around his neck. Nemesis was so focused on Flame that she didn't notice Dream until it was too late. Tommy let out a horrified gasp as Dream tackled her from the side, slamming her into a wall with a force that left a dent in the brick. Flame collapsed on the ground, unconscious, and when the camera turned back to Dream, he could see he was now pinning Nemesis to the wall with his powers. And then, the camera cut off. The screen went black, before switching back to a news reporter who apologized but said that their news crew had been warned to get out of the area, as it was too dangerous for them to continue filming. That was fucking bullshit. The Hero Committee was fine with letting everyone watch as Nemesis attacked Flame, but didn't want anyone to see Dream take her down in return. Either way, Tommy knew he needed to get back to the cafe as soon as possible. He sprinted back down the way he came, his backpack thumping against his back with every step. His heart pounded in his ears, the only thought repeating through his mind being the constant, I need to help Nemesis, I need to help Nemesis, I need to... His legs were burning by the time he skidded to a stop in front of the cafe doors. With trembling hands, he undid the lock, sprinting inside and practically jumping over the counter to get to the back room. Chucking his backpack on the floor, Tommy raced around to the room to set up his treatment area. Towels on the floor, first aid kit propped open next to it, gauze already out in case there was heavy bleeding. Tommy prepped whatever he could think of. There was a ringing in his pocket, and Tommy answered it without even looking at the name. Tommy, I saw it on the news. I'm already here, Tommy said, cutting Siren off. How far away are you? We're here, actually. And right then, there was a sharp knock at the door to the alley. Hanging up the phone, Tommy flung the door open and almost stumbled back at the sight that greeted him. Siren and Blade seemed relatively fine, save for a few tears in their clothes. But Nemesis... Blade was carrying her. She seemed to be unconscious and was curled up against Blade's chest. Her cotton candy hair was sticky with blood, and her mouth was hanging open while her arms, hung limp at her sides. It was such a stark contrast to the determined line her mouth had been set in on the news footage, the fierce rage darkening her eyes. Shit. Okay, no time to panic. He was the healer here. Set it down here, Tommy said, immediately shifting into focus mode and pointing at the towels. What happened exactly? The news footage cut off as soon as Dream pinned her to the wall. That fucking bastard slammed her into that wall as many times as he could before Blade tackled him, Siren told him with a sneer twisting his lips, watching as Blade set Nemesis down with surprising gentleness. She's bleeding a lot from her head, Blade said, shifting Nemesis so she was laying sideways on the towels. Do your healing powers work on head injuries? I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea, Tommy said as he dropped to his knees next to Nemesis, using one hand to carefully try and find the injury under her hair. I've never had to heal a wound before. No, I've never had to heal a head wound before, so I guess we'll find out together. Yeah, there was a lot of blood coming from her skull. Although it was hard to see with all the hair and blood in the way, Tommy was pretty sure he could see cracked bone, and had to clench his jaw to shove down the nausea that rose in his throat. As he moved her head around to try and find the place to put his hands, he noticed a small black earpiece settled in her ear, and he could faintly hear a voice coming from it. Tommy lifted the earpiece and settled it in his own ear, and immediately winced when he heard shouting. Hello? Nikki? Are you there? Can you hear me? It was Thanatos. Tommy remembered how Nemesis mentioned that he wasn't going to be in the field for a little while to continue recovering, but figured he must have been listening to the whole fight. Tommy was so focused on Nemesis that he didn't even register the name Thanatos had said. Oh shit, I just realized, yeah! I didn't think about the fact that he just really said her real name. Thanatos? Tommy spoke into the earpiece. It's Tommy. The shouting cut off, and was quickly followed by a deep sigh of relief. Oh, thank fucking God! Thanatos exclaimed. Jesus fucking Christ! Nemesis wasn't responding to me and I had no clue what the fuck was happening. Is she okay? She's unconscious right now, but I'm about to heal her, Tommy explained, moving aside more of her hair so he could get a clear view of the wound. Meanwhile, Siren and Blade had both settled on the ground on either side of Nemesis, both of them pursing their lips in worry. I've never healed head wounds before though, so I'm not sure how this is gonna go. Well, it's gonna be better than nothing, right? Thanatos asked, although his voice was shaky. Just do it. Don't waste any more time. Yeah, got it. Tommy nodded. He looked down at the wound, trying to figure out where to place his finger so he'd be keeping everything in place. Then, as gently as he could, he closed his eyes and let the energy seep out of him. Immediately, he was hit with a shocking wave of dizziness. Gritting his teeth, he tried to ignore it and kept pushing the warmth out of his hands. Seconds ticked on, and a headache started to pound in its familiar rhythm. His head began to spin and nausea rose up his throat. Fuck, this wasn't as bad as when he'd had to heal Iceman, but it really sucked. Finally, when Tommy could feel himself starting to tip to the side, he pulled his hands away. He pushed himself away from Nemesis's side, taking deep breaths as he swayed in place, sweat beginning across his forehead as he struggled to steady himself. There was an arm around his shoulders to steady him. I got you, Siren said quietly, and Tommy squeezed his eyes shut as he leaned into the hold. His ears were ringing now, and Tommy had the urge to run to the sink and throw up like he had the last time he healed Iceman. Still, he forced himself to sit in place. Thanatos was quiet in his ear, giving Tommy a moment to recuperate. Finally, after a few moments, Tommy was able to open his eyes again. He still felt nauseous as fuck, but there was still sweat pooling on the back of his neck, but the world wasn't spinning as much as it had been. Glancing down at Nemesis, he could see that the fracture in her skull had smoothed out completely. There were still some scar lines, but for the most part, it seemed as though it had been healed. And yet, Nemesis's eyes remained shut. What's going on? Thanatos asked when Tommy was silent. Is she awake yet? Her head wound is healed, Tommy mumbled, blinking as he tried to focus on Nemesis's face. But she's not waking up. What the? Why isn't she waking up? I don't know, Tommy admitted, anxiety curling around his gut as he stared at Nemesis's sleeping face. She's breathing, but she hasn't opened her eyes. We should try to wake her up in case she has a concussion, Blade said, reaching out to rest a hand on her shoulder. Nemesis, you gotta get up. I know you probably feel terrible, but you can't sleep right now. Nemesis didn't react. Nemesis? Tommy tried, reaching down to squeeze her hand. Can you hear us? Nemesis, get up! Siren tried, his voice echoing with charm speak. There was no response. Shit. She's definitely unconscious because if she heard that, she would have gotten up, Siren said, dropping his arm from Tommy's shoulders. Tommy? Tommy? What's happening? Thanatos asked, his voice now edged with panic. Come on, keep me updated! Is she awake yet? Is Nikki awake? Tommy frowned. Nikki? He questioned, making Siren and Blade's heads whip towards him. That was the name Thanatos had said a few minutes earlier when Tommy had first put the earpiece in. There was a beat of silence from the other end of the earpiece. Fucking hell, Thanatos muttered. Fuck it, we trust you. Her name is Nikki. Maybe if you say that, it'll help her wake up. Tommy's heart stuttered at that. Thanatos had just given Tommy Nemesis's name. He knew Nemesis's name. Holy shit. So far, none of the villains had given Tommy any identifying information about themselves, despite repeatedly telling him how much they trusted him. Tommy didn't mind this. He knew it was more to protect him than it was for them to protect themselves. But still, hearing Thanatos say that it was fine that he knew Nemesis's name because they trusted him, well, it made something warm grow in his chest. Either way, now wasn't the time to focus on that. Nikki? Tommy tried, his tongue tripping over the new name. Nikki, can you hear us? For a moment, there was still nothing. And then, there was a fluttering behind her eyelids, and Tommy almost cheered. Yeah, Nikki, that's it. Come on, you gotta wake up. Tommy encouraged, squeezing her hand again. Nikki, come on, come back to us, Blade said, still resting his hand on her shoulder. There was more fluttering, and Tommy turned to give Siren an expectant look. Nikki, wake up, Siren ordered. And just like that, Nemesis's eyes were flying open. Gasping, she bolted upright, only to hiss in pain and grab her head. Immediately, Blade wrapped his arm around her to steady her, and she leaned into his side without hesitation. Fucking hell, she exclaimed, squeezing her eyes shut as she grabbed her head. Why does my head feel like it got smashed with a hammer? It was Dream. He tackled you when you were fighting Flame, Siren explained. Shit. I think I remember that, Nemesis muttered. Then she winced. Yeah, I do. Fuck, that hurt. Is that her? Thanatos asked in Tommy's ear. Yeah, that's her, Tommy said, drawing Nemesis' attention to him. Nemesis blinked a few times, as if she was struggling to focus. Tommy? Did you heal me? I did, yeah. Tommy nodded, ignoring how another wave of dizziness washed over him at the gesture. I've also been talking to Thanatos. Here, you should probably calm him down, he said, pulling out the earpiece to hand back to her. Nemesis's eyes widened at the mention of her partner, and she shoved the earpiece in her ear in an almost violent manner. Thanatos? Are you there? She paused as she listened to whatever he was saying, and then a relieved smile broke out over her face. Oh God, I'm so sorry I scared you like that, she giggled softly. Yeah, I promise I'm not gonna do anything stupid like that again. Another pause, and then her eyes widened. Wait, you told him my name? Tommy shrunk back as Nemesis whipped her head back towards him, although the movement made her wince. To his surprise, there was no anger in her eyes as she stared at him. More than anything, she just seemed confused. You know my name? She asked carefully. Yeah, sorry, Nikki, Tommy said quietly, wrapping his arms around himself. Of course I'm not going to say anything or tell anyone. Don't worry about that, Nemesis said, shaking her head. I trust you, Tommy. You saved my life after all. Tommy flushed at how genuine she sounded, and his cheeks only burned worse when she reached out to wrap his hand in her own. Seriously, I don't have a problem with you knowing my name. I trust you, she told him softly, and thank you for saving me. You guys really don't need to thank me every time, Tommy muttered, curling in on himself. But we want you to know how grateful we are, Nemesis explained. She paused then, a hand going up to her earpiece. Thanatos also says thank you. Like I said, I'm just doing my job. Tommy shrugged. Nemesis smiled at him, squeezing his hand one last time before pulling back and glancing at Blade. Blade, do you think you can help me get home? I still feel pretty dizzy. Yeah, of course. Blade said, huffing as he pushed to his feet. He bent down and scooped Nemesis up in his arms again without any sign of effort, and nodded at Siren and Tommy. I'll see you guys later. Bye, Blade. Bye, Nemesis. Tommy waved. Nemesis waved goodbye to him, and Tommy watched as Blade easily shifted Nemesis to one arm to open the door back to the back alley. Then, they both disappeared into the shadows, and the door slammed shut behind them. As soon as the two of them were gone, Tommy's fatigue returned in full force. He slumped down, his head pounding as the nausea that had been stirring in his gut demanded his attention once more. Looked like tonight was going to be a recovery night. I need to clean up, Tommy muttered, glancing at Siren before pushing himself to his feet. Or, he tried to push himself to his feet. As soon as he attempted to stand, his vision began to spin, and he found himself tipping heavily to the side. Siren was there in a second, wrapping his arms around Tommy to hold him upright. Tommy leaned against Siren's chest, taking a few deep breaths as he tried to shove the nausea back down again. Are you okay? Siren asked, his voice thick with worry. I'm okay, Tommy forced out. I just need to, There was another roil in his gut, and suddenly Tommy was stumbling towards the sink. Like Nemesis did last time, Siren gently rubbed his back as he puked into the sink. As he was spitting out the last few bits, Siren handed him a glass of water, which he drank with the fervor of a man in a desert. Once he was done, Tommy slumped against the edge of the sink and let out a pained whine. I hate when that happens, he mumbled, his eyes fluttering shut. Does that happen often? You throwing up after healing someone? Siren asked. Tommy shook his head. No, it's mostly just for bad injuries. Or I think in Nemesis's case it was a head injury, so it made me feel dizzy, which fucked up my stomach. He had begun to notice that depending on the injury, the side effects of his healing would be slightly different. Like for Iceman's burns, Tommy's hands had been painfully hot. For Jester's broken bone, Tommy had been extremely sore. Now it seemed that with Nemesis's head wound, Tommy was going to be dizzy as hell for the next day or so. Siren nodded. I'll help walk you home then. At the mention of home, Tommy froze. He couldn't go back to his apartment like this. Barely able to walk, fatigued out of his mind and on the verge of throwing up, Tebo and Rabu would know exactly what he had done, and he really did not have the energy to try and hash out that conversation, even though he knew he shouldn't put it off. In fact, just the very thought of going back and continuing the argument right now kind of made Tommy want to cry. He felt like shit, and the only thing he wanted to do was curl up in a bunch of blankets and not poke his head out till morning. I can't go home, Tommy stammered, blinking fast as the exhaustion started to weigh down his thoughts. My roommates were fighting and I can't deal with them right now. Not like this. Hey, calm down, Siren said, his voice going soft. Don't worry. You don't have to go back there if you don't want to, but I want to make sure you're somewhere safe, with people you trust that you know will take care of you. Is there somewhere like that I can take you? Tommy clenched his jaw as Wilbur's face appeared in his mind. He had already taken advantage of his kindness so much in just the last 24 hours. Charlie! Thank you for the raid! Oh, how was your stream? I'm just reading Tommyinnit's Tommyinnit's Clinic for Supervillains. been looking at words for the longest time and like looking back to my chat. That was... I feel dizzy. I need water, 1 second. Anyway, yeah, how was your stream? I think you were streaming Minecraft, right? Hello, Hayden. So in the story so far, it's basically Tommy has healing powers. He's been healing supervillains. He just found out that his roommates Tobo and Rambu are vigilantes, and Tobo and Rambu found out that he's been healing villains, and they have a fight, and yeah. Where was I? Tommy clenched his jaw as Wilbur's face appeared in his mind. Oh, also, disclaimer, I use voices. Oh, hi Clay, I played Bed Wars with a friend of mine. We did a small karaoke session during it. We won one game, but not much luck after that. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad you guys won one game, though. Disclaimer though, I do use accents for these characters. So I'm sorry if it's cringy, it's for my immersion. Let's see, where was I? Tommy clenched his jaw as Wilbur's face appeared in his mind. Excuse me. He had already taken advantage of his kindness so much in the last 24 hours. He hated the idea of coming right back to him, this time sick out of his mind and asking for help. But he trusted Wilbur. He knew the man wouldn't ask him any questions he couldn't answer, and Tommy also knew he was safe there. Safe with hot chocolate and warm sweaters and Wilbur's arm thrown around his shoulders. Also, if you guys are new to my stream, I have a follower goal that you can see in the top left. When I reach 150 followers, I'm gonna read Percy Jackson on stream. So if you guys want to see that, be sure to drop a follow and leave notifications on so you know when I do that. By the way, Tommy doesn't know the supervillains' identities, like secret identities. So far, he's just recently found out that Nemesis's real name is Nikki, but that's about it. So he doesn't know that Wilbur is Siren. I believe in you, Clay. Thanks, Charlie. Wait, do I still have the PNG? Or whatever. Wait, I have... You got this, thanks. I think I have a... Wait, where is it? Hold on, let me hide the screen. Oh, that... Oop! Why do I have that just there? I thought that was an image of Charles the Bear. Because I remember using one for an Among Us lobby, like Among Us lobbies ages ago, but nope, it was L from Death Note. Anyway, let's see. There's a place I think I can go, Tommy whispered, staring at his hands. Where is it? Will there be someone who can take care of you? Siren asked. Jump scare warning next time. I'm sorry. Siren asked, squeezing his shoulder. Tommy nodded. His name's Wilbur, but I just stayed at his place last night, and I feel bad asking you to stay there again, especially now that I'm all sick and shit. There was a beat of silence from Siren, and Tommy glanced up to see the villain giving him a strange look. But then, the moment passed as quickly as it appeared, and Siren shook his head before speaking again. I doubt that, Wilbur would mind having you stay there again, especially since you're sick, Siren reassured. Do you trust him? Is he, a good friend to you? That was an easy question at least. Yeah, I trust him. He is one of my best friends. He smiled to himself for just a moment. I don't think he'd protest if I asked to stay with him again. He's way too fucking nice for that. I just don't want to be taking advantage of him. Tommy, I doubt he thinks of it as you taking advantage of him, Siren told him. In fact, he'd probably be happy that you trusted him enough to come to him. Tommy thought back to earlier that morning, when Phil had told him Wilbur was really happy Tommy came over. Wilbur needed that reassurance that Tommy trusted him, and Tommy knew he could come to Wilbur when he needed help. Plus, it wasn't like he could go back to his apartment tonight, and there really was no other option besides Wilbur. Okay, Tommy finally agreed after a few beats. I'll go to his place. Siren beamed. Alright, let me clean this up for you and then we can head out. Tommy frowned. Wait, I can clean up myself. Shush, child. You need to rest, so just sit down and wait. Although Tommy didn't like being ordered around like a child, he had to admit, standing was already difficult enough as it was. The idea of moving around the back room to clean up the towels and gauze sounded unbelievably exhausting. So, with a scowl on his face, Tommy watched as Siren put the towels where Tommy told him to, and threw out the bloody gauze, making sure to hide it under the other trash in the bin. Then, he wiped down the floor like Tommy normally did to make sure there were no bloodstains he missed, all without a single word of complaint. Then, the two of them headed out. When Tommy's hands were shaking too badly to lock the door, Siren did it for him. At first, Tommy tried to walk down the street towards the train, but after stumbling a few times, Siren picked him up in his arms, ignoring Tommy's cursing protests. At one point, Siren also handed Tommy a red bandana to tie it around the lower half of his face, just in case anyone decided to take pictures of the local Supervillains sighting. It wasn't the best disguise, but it would do the trick for the time being. Why did the music get so loud in my headphones? Is the leveling good for you guys? And can you guys hear me well enough? I tried to lower the mic volume so that I wouldn't sound like a robot. The music is kind of overpowering me. Alright, I'll turn that down real quick. The music is a bit loud, but I can still hear you. Okay, that should be better. I hope. Maybe I'll turn myself up just a little bit. I'm trying not to let myself get into the yellow, because that's when I feel like I can, like, not sound good, you know? Hey, Hayden, did you change the color on your name? Because it was green and now it's purple. Where was I? Oh, there we are. The train ride to South Bay was surprisingly uneventful. I changed it for MCC today and just changed it back. Oh yeah, I did that too, but I changed it back before I started stream. Let me guess, you were rooting for green geckos as well? I was too. Okay, I thought it was 5 out of 6 third places, but I guess it was 4. When did he get not third place besides Red Rabbits when he got 9th? Was there a time when he got 4th? Was there a time when his team got 4th place? Huh. I think there was a time. Wasn't it with Dream? No, they got 3rd place then too, didn't they? Or was... Could be misremembering. I'll have to look at the VODs again and see. I could have sworn that it was 3rd. Let's see. Yeah, mine was green for green geckos and changed it back to coral for Charizard. I was in Scott's stream. I just remember them getting 4th. I feel like I vaguely remember them getting 4th at one point, so that makes sense. The train ride to South Bay was surprisingly uneventful, given that there was a supervillain carrying a teenager as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Unlike in the McDonald's so long ago when the sight of Siren filled the cashier and patrons with fear, the few other subway passengers taking the train this late at night couldn't seem to care less. Sure, there were a few double takes, but no one seemed to want to fuck with their ride home by bothering the local supervillain. I subjected my entire house to Rambu's stream. I could have done that, but my mom's been chilling in the living room, basically bedridden for the past few days because she got surgery, and I would not want to subject her to that. Yeah, I just watched it in my room and got really sad when it was clear they weren't going to get 2nd place. Hope she recovers well. Thanks. I don't know if I'm the one to say thanks to that, but oh well. Sitting in the hard plastic seating of the train, Tommy slumped against Siren's side, hiding his face in the man's dark jacket to try and shield himself from the harsh fluorescent lights of the subway. Siren didn't seem to mind this, looping an arm over his shoulders to pull him closer and help him hide his face even more. Once they were off the train, Siren carried him all the way to the row of brownstones that the Soot family house was settled at. However, before they got close to the house, Siren put him down. "This is as far as I can go," Siren said, an apology laced in his tone. "We don't want to risk Wilbur seeing you with me, now would we?" Tommy stumbled a bit as another wave of dizziness washed over him, but quickly gained his footing. "Don't worry about it, big man. I got it from here." "Tommy, you should really be thinking about how Siren knew how to get to Wilbur's house. 'Cause Tommy didn't give you instructions." God, this kid's dumb as bricks. First it was the villains being able to find his apartment after Wilbur taking him home. Now this! Also, in a previous chapter, he went back to his apartment, and Tubbo and Romber weren't there. He turned the news on and saw vigilantes Nuke and Ender fighting, and Nuke got, like, a chest wound or something. And then Tubbo and Rombu walk back into the house, like, a bit later, with like, Tubbo slumped over Rombu. Or the other way around. I don't know. Put 2 and 2 together, man! Tommy needs to do a better job at not doxing himself. Well, like, it was just one time that he let Wilbur, who he'd gotten to know quite a bit at that point, walk him home. Can't remember why exactly. But, oh well. "Alright," Siren said, ruffling his hair with a gloved hand. "Remember, I'm always just a text away if you need me." Snorting, Tommy lightly slapped Siren's hand away. Yes, I know. Now go fuck off back to your evil lair." Grinning at Tommy, Siren nodded once before turning on his heel and disappearing around the corner of the street. Tommy waited a few seconds to make sure he was steady on his legs, before he turned and made his way down the sidewalk, watching the numbers on the houses for the one that matched the Soot house. All these villains going after himself. Boy, you trying to get hurt. Listen, Tommy's their healer. They're not gonna hurt him. Nor do they want to. Because what I've learned from the story so far is Sure, the villains are villains and evil, but the heroes are just as bad, if not worse. Because the heroes have a pact to incapacitate, not to kill villains. But the reason why Tommy got into this mess in the first place was because he found Siren bleeding out in an alleyway, which is not something that heroes typically do, or what they're supposed to do. Is this your first read-through? Yeah, this is my first read-through. I'm going in this blind. I like reading stories, like, for the first time on stream. Of course, if I read Percy Jackson on stream, that's not going to be my first time reading through it. But I figured it would be fun to read with an audience. It's kind of like story times during elementary school. I always loved that. Grinning at Tommy, Siren nodded once before turning on his heel and disappearing around the corner of the street. Tommy waited a few seconds to make sure he was steady on his legs before he turned and made his way down the sidewalk, watching the numbers on the houses for the one that matched the soot house. I already read that paragraph, I just realized. Oh well. It wasn't that far of a walk, thankfully. Tommy stumbled up the steps, already feeling embarrassment burn his cheeks as he steadied himself in front of the door. Shit. Despite Siren's reassurance, he still felt bad about coming back here so soon. A part of him wanted to turn around right now and take the train back to Eastside. Maybe he could sleep in the cafe. He's sure Puffy wouldn't mind. No, Tommy was being stupid. Wilbur would probably call him a dumbass if he knew Tommy was getting so worked up about this. He needed to stop getting embarrassed and learn how to ask for help. So, gritting his teeth, Tommy lifted a hand and knocked on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then there was the sound of something crashing inside, followed by a loud "fuck" that sounded vaguely like Wilbur. Then there was another crashing sound, and Tommy wondered if he should call out to ask if everything was okay. But before Tommy could get too worried, the door swung open, revealing a panting Wilbur. His hair was completely messed up, and his cheeks were red as if he'd just been running. Still, his eyes widened when he saw Tommy. "Tommy? You're back?" he asked, something strange in his voice. Yeah," Tommy said, ducking his eyes to the ground. I mean, if it's a bother, I can leave, but I got sick at work and I kind of don't want to go back to my apartment while I'm sick," and Tommy was cut off by warm arms wrapping around him and pulling him close. Tommy took a shaky breath as he leaned his weight onto Wilbur, his spinning head screaming in relief at having someone to lean on again. "It's okay, Toms," Wilbur reassured him, resting a hand on the back of his head. "You're always welcome here. You can stay for as long as you need. It's no trouble at all. I don't want to be taking advantage of you," Tommy admitted in a whisper, his voice muffled by Wilbur's sweater. "You're not taking advantage of me," Wilbur reassured him. "I love having you here. Seriously." Tommy wanted to believe him. He really did. "Okay then," he mumbled into Wilbur's sweater. He felt Wilbur smile into his hair. "Okay," he repeated. "Now let's get you somewhere to lay down because you're leaning on me like you're about to pass out." And suddenly, Wilbur was scooping him up, despite Tommy's loud whine of protest. "I'm not a baby, I can walk myself," he argued. Wilbur grunted as he readjusted his arms under Tommy's back. "I'd rather you not fall over while I try to get you to the living room." Tommy groaned, but knew Wilbur was right. He probably would fall over if he tried to walk right now, considering his vision was still spinning with every step he took. So instead, Tommy hid his face in Wilbur's shirt and tried not to focus on the vertigo-inducing sensation as he was carried into the living room. Wilbur gently placed him on the couch, pointing a finger at him to get him to stay put as he ran off to grab something. Huffing, Tommy pulled his shoes off and spread his legs out on the cushions, squeezing his eyes shut to avoid the stabbing light coming from the lamp in the corner. A few moments later, Wilbur's footsteps padded back into the room. A warm blanket was draped over him, and when Tommy opened his eyes, he saw Wilbur setting a folded pair of clothes on the coffee table in front of him. "If you feel well enough to get up, feel free to change into these. They're just more pajamas of mine," he explained. "Now, do you want anything to eat or drink?" Oh God, food. The very thought made his nausea spike again, and he shook his head. "Nausea?" Wilbur asked. Tommy nodded, and he tapped his chin. "How about tea, then? Peppermint tea can help soothe an upset stomach, if you think that'll help." While Tommy really wanted hot chocolate, he knew that having rich hot chocolate while he was still so dizzy was not a good idea. So he nodded again, and Wilbur hummed happily, reaching out to ruffle Tommy's hair as he disappeared into the kitchen again. With Wilbur working in the kitchen, Tommy took the opportunity to force himself to his feet, and stumbled to the bathroom so he could change into the offered clothes. He almost fell down again, and maybe had to grip the sink a few times, but managed to stay upright before collapsing back onto the couch in a heap. Okay, I feel like this music is still a bit too loud, so I'm actually going to turn it down in YouTube. There we go. I also need a little drink break. 1 second. Sometimes these lo-fi songs just get drastically loud for some reason. And it's not just because my headphones are doing this weird thing where if I keep them at certain angles, the volume kind of goes down a bit, but you know what? It's fine. Soon after, he was settled under the blanket again, and Wilbur came back carrying 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to Tommy, and when he sniffed it, it was overwhelmingly mint-scented. "I put a little bit of honey in it to sweeten it, but if you want more, let me know," Wilbur said, leaning back against his side of the couch and sipping his own tea. Tommy took a hesitant sip, and sighed in relief when the warmth hit his tongue. Despite the strong mint scent, the flavor wasn't nearly as intense. It was sweet with a hint of peppermint, the two in a careful balance that had been perfectly crafted. Although his head was still spinning, the mint immediately calmed the roiling nausea, and Tommy drank nearly half the mug before putting it back on the table. Then, he settled back into the couch, nestling into the arm of it as he closed his eyes again. Keeping them open was too disorienting, and the fatigue was still weighing down his bones. But it was hard to get comfortable against the couch. He readjusted a few times, struggling to find a good position to fall asleep in. Then he heard Wilbur shift beside him, and suddenly he was being pulled towards a warm chest as arms wrapped around him. In his sleepy state, he immediately leaned into the touch, and Wilbur shifted around until they were both stretched out, with Tommy's head resting on his chest. Tommy was dangerously close to falling asleep now. He was tired, dizzy, and the tea had soothed his stomach for the time being. Not to mention, Wilbur was a very comfortable pillow. As he started to doze off, though, Wilbur's voice pulled him back to reality. "I'm sorry," Wilbur whispered. Oh, I feel like the video's over. Okay, let me bring it back to the beginning real quick. There we go. his fingers absently playing with Tommy's hair. Tommy didn't open his eyes, but frowned all the same. Sorry for what? You haven't done anything wrong. Wilbur didn't need to apologize for anything. If anything, Tommy should be the one apologizing to him for showing up at his door unannounced and expecting Wilbur to take care of him. Wilbur sighed. I have done something wrong, though, he admitted, voice still low. I'm keeping something from you. More secrets? A part of Tommy wasn't surprised. It seemed everyone these days had their own secrets, especially him. I feel like now that I've turned it down in YouTube, I can turn it back up a little bit to where it was before. There we go. While he knew he shouldn't be upset, he also hadn't told Wilbur about his new side job, and he had no plans to. While he knew he should be upset, he also hadn't told Wilbur about his new job, and he had no plans to. Unlike Tobo and Rambu, Wilbur didn't push for his secrets, so in turn, Tommy didn't push for his. And along with that, he hadn't known Wilbur nearly as long as he knew the two of them. Their secrets stabbed at his heart because he thought they knew they could trust him after all their years together. Despite the fact that Tommy trusted Wilbur, he wouldn't expect the same from him, just because they'd only known each other a few months. So Tommy found he didn't really care about Wilbur's secret. I'm keeping something from you too, Tommy admitted, still keeping his eyes shut. We all have secrets. Yeah, but this is something you deserve to know, but I can't tell you, Wilbur said, and Tommy could imagine the frustrated frown on his face. Is it because it'd be dangerous for me to know? Tommy asked, making Wilbur stiffen. Yeah, it would be, Wilbur confessed. Maybe it was because of how tired he was, or maybe he just knew how to deal with the conversation of dangerous secrets now. But Tommy's response was easy. That's why I can't tell you mine either, Tommy replied. So we're even. But it's fine, Wilbur, seriously, Tommy said, his voice slurring as he got dragged closer to the edge of sleep. Now stop being a dramatic bitch and let me sleep. Wilbur sighed. Okay, get some rest, Toms. In the morning, Tommy was probably going to think a lot more about what Wilbur's secret could be, and how he felt about the idea of someone else he trusted keeping something from him. But for now, Tommy let himself sink into Wilbur's warmth, and into the sweet void of sleep. I think we read one more chapter. I have a little bit left in me. By the way, the author for this story is Bones and the Bees. I think it's the same on Twitter. So go show them some support. I can't speak. Chapter 13. A New Normal. Summary. Tommy gets used to staying at Wilbur's. Trigger warnings, usual wound and blood mentions. If any of you in chat are squeamish about wound and blood mentions, I will not be upset if you leave the stream. You can always come back later. It's not like Tommy was purposefully avoiding going back home. Definitely not. It had been over a week since Tommy had stumbled his way back to Wilbur's, dizzy out of his mind with his mouth tasting like vomit. BRB have to pick someone up? It's okay, Hayden. He had fully recovered within 2 days, and logically there was no reason for him to continue staying with the Soots. But Tommy just didn't mention the idea of leaving, and no one in the house brought it up either. The moment after he fell asleep on the couch wrapped in Wilbur's arms, Tommy woke up to a whole stream of texts from his roommates demanding to know where he was. In his half-asleep state, he ended up telling them he was still at Will's and to not expect him home anytime soon. And from then on, he had proceeded to ignore all of their follow-up text messages. He was being a coward. He knew this. The right thing to do in this situation was to man up and go home so he could talk things out with his roommates. Then maybe he could stop wearing Wilbur's slightly oversized clothes to work every day, and things could go back to the way they'd always been. But things were never going to be fully normal again. Tubbo and Rambu were vigilantes, and Tommy was working as a healer for the Syndicate. Any sense of the old normalcy they had in their lives was out the window. And even if they managed to patch up their argument, which Tommy truly doubted was possible right now, things would never be as simple or easy as they once were. And the thing was, Tommy was terrified of that. He knew it was the truth, but he didn't want to accept it. He didn't want to have to walk into that apartment and feel those icy stares on him. He didn't want his evenings to be sitting on the couch playing random documentaries with no casual bits of laughter or conversation passing between him and his best friends. It was one thing to accept the truth of your situation, but it was a whole other thing to actually confront it. So, Tommy just stayed at the Soot House, deciding to put off the inevitable for as long as he could. One of these days, Wilbur or Phil or Techno was going to get sick of having him hang around, eating their food and using their stuff, and he was going to get kicked out. Which was fine. Totally fine. Not something that made fear lance through his chest every time he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. It was only a matter of time before he had to leave, and when one of the 3 family members told him it was time to go, he was going to thank them for letting him stay as long as he did and force himself to go home. Hold on a second. Okay. My mouth tastes a bit weird. I'm gonna use one of these Listerine patches. Or is it more technically considered a strip? I'm not sure. But he hadn't been given that ultimatum yet. So for now, he was still staying at the Soots. Strangely enough, no one seemed to mind Tommy's lingering presence in the home. Techno offered to drive him to his shifts whenever he noticed Tommy getting ready to leave. Phil would hand him some food to take with him, and Wilbur showed up at the cafe more often than not with the sole purpose of taking the train home with him. No one was surprised when he kept coming back night after night. He was only ever greeted with warm smiles and kind voices asking how his shift went. Though, there was something off in the house. It wasn't about him staying there necessarily. Rather, it was the fact that Wilbur sometimes stared at Tommy like he was a puppy he had accidentally kicked. It was frankly a bit ridiculous how guilty Wilbur seemed to be over this secret he was keeping from Tommy. Although there was a part of Tommy that prickled at the idea of someone else he trusted keeping stuff from him. He believed Wilbur when he said it was dangerous for him to know. Unless Tommy was willing to come clean about his own work with the Syndicate to Wilbur, he had no right to want to delve into Wilbur's secrets. Wilbur clearly didn't seem to agree. It was so obvious that he wanted to just spill out whatever was on his mind, but anytime he got close to it, either Techno or Phil would appear nearby and give him a pointed look that would instantly shut him up. But besides all the guilty looks, for the most part, staying at the Soot House was something Tommy found he really enjoyed. It was just so easy. He didn't have to worry about how much food was in the fridge. He didn't wake up with backaches from sleeping on old, lumpy couches, and, of course, the light tension in the house was nothing like the storm that had been brewing in his apartment for weeks. Tommy spent most of his time with Wilbur, though he also hung out with Techno and Phil on occasion. Sometimes they would all be busy with whatever work they did, and Tommy would be left to his own devices, which he found he didn't mind. Wilbur had an old GameCube he gave to Tommy to play on, and he spent hours on end playing the oldest version of Animal Crossing available, which was way more fun than he expected it to be. Hold on a second. Tommy tried his best not to listen in when the Soots talked about work. Sometimes Wilbur would pace down the halls with a phone into his ear, talking in vague terms about different plans they had to run through. One night, when Tommy was trying to sneak to the kitchen to get a bag of crisps from the cabinet, he had heard Wilbur talking on the phone and froze. "Quackity, you've been dodging my calls for the past 3 days. Tell me what the hell happened that night," Wilbur said, his voice sharper than Tommy had ever heard it before. There was a pause as this Quackity seemingly replied, and Wilbur let out a shocked noise. "One second, chat." Charlie, what are you doing? I have a conversation with my sister for 30 seconds and I come back to you being wholesome? Stop it. Stop it. Where was I? Spamming chat with wholesome messages. I will ban you. No, I won't ban you. I would never do that. Where was I? Oh yeah. There is a pause as this Quackity seemingly replied, and Wilbur let out a shocked noise. You left him with them? What the fuck were you thinking? Another pause. Wait, you said this happened 3 nights ago? A sharp breath in. Oh fucking hell. I think I just realized something. Clay hasn't. Clay is just. Oh, wait. Oh, that one actually. Oh, thank you. That one actually means a lot. There was one more pause, and Wilbur opened his mouth to say something else, when his eyes flitted towards the door, which Tommy was awkwardly peeking his head around. Tommy froze in place, heart leaping into his throat as he realized he'd been caught eavesdropping. Wilbur's expression was unreadable as he motioned at Tommy to stay there. Quackity, I gotta go. I'll text you my thoughts later, he said, and then he hung up and shoved the phone in his pocket. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to listen in. I was just walking by and... Hey, it's okay, Wilbur reassured, an easy smile slipping onto his face. You just startled me, that's all. Is, everything okay? Tommy asked, eyeing Wilbur warily. You sounded kinda pissed. Wilbur's face softened at that. It's nothing you need to worry about, Toms. I promise. Tommy wasn't so sure, but he nodded anyway. Okay then. Reaching out, Wilbur squeezed his shoulder. I gotta make another call, but you should go downstairs. Phil's almost done with dinner. As Tommy began to trudge back down the steps, he could faintly hear Wilbur's voice again as he picked up another call. Hey Sam? I need to get files on 2 people, but all I have for them is an address. After that, there were no more incidents involving overheard phone calls. Wilbur stopped making business calls in his room, and Tommy couldn't help but feel guilty that it was his fault Wilbur couldn't do his work without worrying about Tommy eavesdropping. However, every time he tried to apologize for the incident, Wilbur reassured him it was fine, and that he needed to stop taking his work home with him anyway. Besides accidental eavesdropping, the only difficult part of living with the Soots was having to hide his second job from the group, which turned out to be easier than expected. Tommy never got questioned when he got back late from his shift because he had to heal someone. Sometimes Techno would make a comment about how Tommy should have called for a ride instead of taking the train at that time. Or maybe Phil would ask if the espresso machine broke again. But there was never any suspicion. There was a certain relief that came with not being under any scrutiny, not needing to make up an increasingly ridiculous lies to hide his tracks. Overall, things were really good. Tommy was avoiding his roommates, hiding his work with the syndicate from the Soots, and was still managing to balance his job as a barista with his job as a healer for villains. I'm going to bed when you finish this chapter. I was probably going to end stream after finishing this chapter. Maybe raid somebody. I like raiding people. Especially knowing I have the viewers to do so sometimes now. So, of course, one of those things had to come crashing down. The back room of the cafe was prepped with Tommy's usual setup. He had gotten a call a few minutes before and was now waiting for his latest patient to show up. Thankfully, this wasn't a potentially lethal injury. Can I suggest someone when you do raid? Of course. I wouldn't regularly take suggestions from chat, but I trust you. Thankfully, this wasn't a potentially lethal injury, just something that was more annoying than anything else and was drawing too much attention not to fix. There was a soft knock at the door, and when Tommy swung it open, he was met with a blood-covered Daedalus. Also, I know it's probably pronounced Daedalus or something like that, but I don't care. Daedalus sounds cooler, so I'm using it. And I've always pronounced it like that, so fuck you. Well, he wasn't really covered in blood. It was mostly just the visible part of his face above his mask. Is that your blood? Tommy asked, stepping aside to let the man in. Unfortunately, yes, Daedalus answered, ducking under the doorframe to accommodate his secondary robotic arms. Got nailed right above my forehead with a piece of glass, and it won't stop bleeding now. The cut isn't too deep, but I can't see with all this blood in my eyes. Jesus Christ, man. Here, sit down. Don't want you to crash into something, Tommy instructed, guiding Daedalus toward the towels he laid down. As soon as Daedalus was on the floor, Tommy knelt down beside him, reaching into his first aid kit for a towelette to wipe away the blood with. the movements of preparing his supplies, soaking a towelette in water at the sink and setting aside some spare gauze. It was nearly as familiar to him now as he practiced routines during his cafe shift. Making sure not to press too hard, Tommy began to wipe away the blood on Daedalus's forehead. A month or two before, his hands might have been trembling while he did this, nerves racking his body at being so close to the famed supervillain. But now, there was no shaking, and no fear. Tommy wasn't sure when he'd stopped being afraid of the Syndicate completely. It had been a gradual shift, and Tommy couldn't say he minded it in the slightest. As the towelette was stained with crimson, slowly the natural peach shade of Daedalus's skin became visible once more. Without all the blood in the way, Tommy was able to spot the cut rather easily, seeing that it was sitting right at Daedalus's hairline. This wasn't a large injury at all, nor one that would be inconvenient for Daedalus to let heal on its own, but also Tommy knew that it wasn't the type of wound to take anything out of it. Maybe he would be a bit sleepy, but there wouldn't be any worse side effects to healing it than that. So after cleaning off his forehead, Tommy reached up with his hands and let his hands glow orange once more. After only a few seconds, the glowing faded, and the cut had turned into a thin white scar. Once the glowing was done, Daedalus hummed, and Tommy realized he had his eyes closed. "That's so relaxing," Daedalus murmured as Tommy pulled his hands away. Tommy frowned. "It is?" While he knew what it felt like to heal himself, a bit of warmth under the skin, he had never actually asked how it felt for other people. He wasn't sure if he'd ever heard anyone say it was relaxing. Blinking open his pitch-black eyes, Daedalus nodded. "Yeah, it's really warm. It's nice to feel." "Huh. Didn't know that," Tommy muttered, picking up the towel again to wipe away the rest of the blood on Daedalus's head. Daedalus frowned, a few wrinkles popping up next to his eyes. "Can't you heal yourself?" "Yeah, can. But it's never felt relaxing before. Just gets warm, but not really in a pleasant way," Tommy explained. "Probably because you're the one doing the work. When you're healing others, we just get the benefits. If you're healing yourself, you still have to work to do it," Daedalus muttered, looking lost in thought as Tommy finally put the towel down. "I guess so. I don't know." Tommy shrugged as he set the towel aside to wash off later. "You should be good to go, though." "Thanks, Tommy," Daedalus said, rolling his neck and lifting his arms above his head to stretch them. "You alright? You don't seem that tired, but I'm worried." Tommy shrugged again. "I'm fine. Wasn't a big deal to heal that." "Yeah, but you still just had a full shift at the cafe. Honestly, I'm surprised you're not more dead on your feet while you're working," Daedalus commented, his secondary robotic arms then taking their turn to stretch. Snorting, Tommy snapped the lid to the first aid kit shut. "I could be. You don't know." Daedalus was silent for a moment, considering Tommy with a thoughtful gaze. "Well, whenever I come by during your shifts, you seem pretty attentive," Daedalus said, a forced casualness in his tone. "Wait, what?" Tommy whipped his head up from the first aid kit, eyes widening as Daedalus pointedly looked away from him. "The fuck do you mean you've come by during my shifts?" he asked. Daedalus shrugged. "I was in civilian clothes, just happened to be in the area, and I figured I'd see you if you were as good at making coffee as you are at saving lives." "What the fuck? What the fuck?" Daedalus had been to the cafe in his civilian form and ordered coffee from Tommy? Tommy had met one of the Syndicate in civilian form and didn't even know it. "More than you know, Tommy, more than you know." "What the? You weren't worried or anything? That I might recognize you as some shit? Tommy exclaimed, gaping at the man. Not really. Even if you did, I figured you wouldn't say anything, but I had a feeling you wouldn't. Tommy was reminded of when he'd healed Nemesis only a week before. How easily she accepted the fact that he knew her name without any kind of worry about how that could backfire on her. Instead of being upset, she brushed away all her potential concerns with a casual, "I trust you." Have I met any other syndicate members without realizing it? Tommy asked without thinking. Daedalus chuckled. I can't tell you that, at least not specifics. But I will say I'm not the only one who stopped by your cafe while you're working. And it's not because you guys don't trust me and want to make sure I'm not doing anything sus? Tommy pushed, narrowing his eyes. What? No, of course not. Daedalus shook his head. It's the opposite. We come there because we trust you and want to just make sure you're doing alright. The idea of the syndicate stopping by the cafe in their civilian forms, of risking getting recognized just to check in on him. It was strange. It didn't make sense. Sure, the syndicate kept saying they trusted him, and at this point Tommy was pretty inclined to believe them. But he didn't understand why. How had he earned the trust of the most intimidating supervillain organization in the city? Huh. Good to know, Tommy muttered, looking at his hands. Guess if I see a guy with green hair walk in, I'll make sure not to look at his face. Daedalus chuckled. Probably best for you to keep yourself oblivious if you can, he agreed. Then, with a grunt, Daedalus pushed to his feet. I better get going, though. Don't want to keep you here too long. He reached out a hand to help Tommy to his feet as well, and then patted his shoulder once before turning for the door. Tommy waved as he headed out into the alley, the door shutting behind him with a loud click. Sighing, Tommy turned to look back at the rest of the back room, mulling over the new information in his head. He was tempted to think back on any customers that seemed familiar to him. Is this your mod account, Charlie? That's funny. But thank you for the follow. Where was I? You just made it now? Do you want to be a mod? None of my mods show up to my streams. I mean, sure, nothing happens that would warrant mod help, but just an offer, you know? Where was I? He was tempted to think back on any customers that seemed familiar to him, to see if he could find any similarities between them and the syndicate. Wait, what was pretty rude? What did I say? Oh! I thought you were saying I was being rude to you. Oh my god. I get what you're saying now. Okay. Rude that your mods don't show up, yeah. Which account would you prefer it being? The Charizard mod one? Or your main? I think some of them just don't have the time, but the other ones don't really. They see. One of them sees some of the things I send in the mod Discord, and like responds to it, but never shows up. Either one? Okay. I think I'll just make your main a mod. I gotta remember to add you to the Discord. I try and let my mods know ahead of time when I'm gonna be streaming. Mod Charizard Gaming. I think I did it right. I think that should work. If not, I'll figure it out after stream. Now, where was I? But at the same time, he knew that was a rabbit hole he shouldn't go down. He had a strange feeling that if he started looking for similarities between anyone he'd met and the Syndicate, he would find them all too quickly. Yeah! Maybe you would find them all too quickly, Tommy. This guy dumb as bricks. So instead of doing that, Tommy bent down to pick up the first aid kit and move it back under the sink. Right as he was sliding it under the pipes, though, there was a sharp knock at the back door, and Tommy frowned. Did Daedalus forget something? Hang on, I'm coming, Tommy said, straightening up and heading back over to the door. Did you forget something, As soon as Tommy swung the door open, his words immediately died on his lips, because Daedalus wasn't the person on the other side of the door. Instead, it was his roommates, expressions hidden behind their vigilante masks. Rambu was slightly bent over, with an arm wrapped around Tubbo's waist as Tubbo leaned into him, as if Tubbo was struggling to stand up on his own. Even with the gas mask on, Tubbo was keeping his face tilted towards the floor, the hand not grabbing onto Rambu pressed against his side. What the fuck? Tommy blurted out without thinking. What were they doing here? Had they really decided to ambush him so they could talk? Look, I know we need to talk about stuff, but Tubbo's hurt, Rambu said without preamble. Fuck off, I'm fine, Tubbo bit back. Although his voice was tight, Tommy realized he could see blood staining Tubbo's jacket. If you're not fine, you've been dizzy from blood loss the entire walk over here, Rambu snapped back. Claire just opened Among Us. I like Among Us, it's fun. But is that one of those crying emoticons? Usually with capital T's it means crying. Why are you crying why are you crying over Among Us? Also, good to know the command worked. Rambu snapped back, his level voice having turned sharp. I'm not dying, so it's not a big deal. Don't be fucking ridiculous. Oh, wait, no. Don't be fucking ridiculous. Get your ass in here. Tommy cut him off, stepping out of the doorway and gesturing for the two to come in. Tommy's heart was pounding in his chest as Rambu half-carried Tubbo into the back room, setting him down on the towels that were still stained with Daedalus's blood and taking the mask off for him. Feeling as though he was on autopilot, Tommy shut the back door, making sure to click the lock, before he wandered back over to the sink to take out the first aid kit once more. The room was dead silent as Tommy knelt next to Tubbo on the floor, popping open the first aid kit and taking out some gauze while eyeing the blood coating his fingers. Anxiety was twisting his gut into knots, but he shoved it aside and tried to focus on falling into the easy routine of his job like he had with Daedalus. What happened? He asked quietly, pushing Tubbo's hand to the side so he could actually look at the wound. Run in with 404. Turns out he's got a thing for throwing knives, Rambu explained, pushing his hood down to rub his temples. I tried to teleport Tubbo out of the way in time, but I was just half a second too late. Oh, shut up! Stop blaming yourself for everything! Tubbo snapped, hissing in pain when Tommy lifted the jacket away from the wound. It was a slash across his side, and while it didn't look like it hit anything important, It was deep. You can't keep me from getting hurt all the time. Shit happens. Yeah, but I should've... Rambu, no self-blame in this cafe, Tommy said, cutting him off. Tubbo's right. Accidents happen. It's not your fault. Rambu seemed as though he wanted to argue, but when he opened his mouth again, Tommy shot him a sharp look and he shut up. He always hated when Rambu went on one of his self-blame spirals, mainly because it was never actually his fault, but it was always so hard to convince him otherwise. Using the gauze, Tommy dabbed away some of the excess blood. Then he reached for the wound, but paused. This is gonna hurt for a second, Tommy explained. Tommy, you've healed me before, Tubbo pointed out. Just warning you so you don't bite your tongue. Leaning forward, he reached out to grab the edges of the wound and pushed them together. Tubbo let out a whine and grabbed Rambu's hand, and Tommy closed his eyes as his hands began to glow once more. This wound definitely took a bit more effort to heal than Daedalus's did. It wasn't by much, but as the seconds passed, Tommy's head began to pound. If he had to guess, that headache wasn't going to go away for the rest of the night. Once Tommy let go, he immediately leaned against the wall, taking a few deep breaths to push past the throbbing behind his eyes. There were a few seconds of silence. Then, Tommy blinked open his eyes and saw Rambu and Tubbo both watching him. Are you alright? Rambu asked, reaching out to rest a hand on his arm. I'm fine, just got a headache from healing that's all, Tommy replied, shrugging Rambu's hand off of him. Tubbo, how does it look? Has a scar, but otherwise it's totally closed, Tubbo said, dropping his shirt back down and laying on his back. I'm still fucking dizzy though. Just give it a few minutes and it'll go away, Tommy told him. Another hush fell over the group, and Tommy dug his nails into his palm. This was what he had been afraid of, the tension suffocating the air between the three, making even the idea of casual conversation feel like torture. It wasn't how things were supposed to be between the three of them. Tommy hated it so much. We, saw Daedalus when we were on our way here. Rambu spoke up after a minute of half of dead silence. And a half of dead silence. Did I heal him? Tommy asked, raising an eyebrow. Rambu nodded, and he sighed. Yep, sure did. Are you gonna yell at me about how that makes me a terrible person? Rambu's eyes fell to the ground, and he wrapped his arms around his knees. Tommy, you're not a bad person. Do the words, "you're healing murderers," Tommy, not ring a bell? You two gave me so much shit and acted like I was the fucking scum of the earth for wanting to give people medical treatment. Tommy snapped, his irritation growing in time with the throbbing in his head. Yeah, but we weren't implying, Rambu started. Look, I don't want to argue about it, at least not tonight, Tommy said, cutting him off. I know we need to hash it all out and have another scream fest or whatever the fuck, but my head is killing me and I don't have the energy to get into it with you two right now. I agree, Tubbo chimed in, still laying on the floor. I'm way too tired to get mad right now. Sighing, Rambu pulled his knees closer to his chest. I get that. That's fine. But when are you coming home? Tommy blinked, frowning at Rambu. Home? They wanted him to come home? Hold on a second. There we go. I mean, I didn't think you two would exactly be waiting for me to come back, Tommy admitted quietly. At this, Tubbo sat up again, his brows furrowed. It's your home too, idiot. We weren't going to kick you out or anything just because we had a fight. Not to mention, the landlord told us you paid for the next 2 months' rent in advance. So if anything, you have more of a right to it than we do right now, Rambu added. Also, I would ask how you got that kind of money, but I think it's kind of self-explanatory at this point. Syndicate must be paying you a shit ton for you to get that kind of money so fast, Tubbo said, rolling his neck. But anyway, yeah. Are you gonna stop sleeping on Wilbur's couch and come home? Tommy shouldn't be surprised that they wanted him to come home. Things were clearly still off between the three of them. No apologies had been made, and they nearly had gotten into another shouting match just a few minutes earlier. But the two of them wanted him to go back to the apartment. Tommy should go home. He knew that. But seeing the two of them again stirred up all the ugly emotions. Stirred up all the ugly emotions that had come out the week before during their fight, reminding him of the stabbing pain in his chest that was still there and was probably going to stick around for a long time. Tommy wrung his hands in his lap, trying to figure out how to put his jumbled mess of thoughts into words. Could he go home tonight? Just follow the two of them back to their apartment and take his shift in the bed like there was nothing wrong? No, Tommy finally said, forcing himself to look up and meet his friend's eyes. Not yet. Tubbo let out a noise of confusion. What? Why not? I'm not ready to come back yet, he admitted, hunching his shoulders and glancing back at the floor. I need time to think about everything that happened and how I feel about it all. I need some time to sort out my emotions and shit. He waited for the yelling, for the accusations that he was trying to avoid their confrontation. This was something that was going to piss his two friends off, he knew it. But instead, Tubbo just nodded. Okay, that's understandable. It's probably better for us to have some time to sort things out too, Rambu added, although he seemed much sadder than he had been a few moments before. So we can figure out what we're going to do with all of our situations. Yeah, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, Tubbo muttered, shaking his head. So you're just gonna keep staying at Wilbur's? I am, yeah. Tommy nodded. He doesn't mind that you're staying so long? Rambu asked, furrowing his brows. Nope. He said I can stay as long as I need to, he explained, tapping his fingers against his calf. There was a beat of silence as both Tubbo and Rambu considered this. He sounds like a good friend, Rambu commented. Tommy nodded. Yeah, he really is, he said softly. There was another silent moment before Tubbo spoke up again. So, kinda random, but what the hell was up with that picture of Siren carrying you on the subway from last week? He asked, leaning back on his hands. Oh shit. Yeah, the pictures of him with the bandana on his first... The pictures of him with the bandana on his first, being carried in Siren's arms into the train car nearly 1 in the morning, had circulated around Twitter. Although it hadn't made the actual news, should have figured he'd get asked about that. Dream did a number on Nemesis during their fight last week, so I healed her and it took a lot out of me. Siren ended up having to carry me back to Will's because I was too dizzy to walk, Tommy explained. Wait, did Wilbur see Siren? Rambu asked, frowning at him. Tommy snorted. Fuck no. He just dropped me off on Wilbur Street and left. So, Wilbur doesn't know about... Tubbo trailed off, gesturing to the first aid kit. No, of course not. I already have you two involved in this hero-villain vigilante shit. I don't want to drag Will in too. Tommy scoffed, shaking his head. Tubbo and Rambu shared a wide-eyed look, and Tommy recognized it as the look they gave each other when they were having another silent conversation. What? Why are you giving each other that weird look? Well... Rambu scratched the back of his neck. We kinda, thought that Wilbur was Siren? Huh? Tommy blinked, trying to wrap his head around what Rambu just said. He and Tubbo thought that Wilbur was Siren? If his head wasn't pounding, he would have laughed out loud at the idea. Ah yes, Wilbur, who talked about eating sand and couldn't function without 3 espresso shots in the morning, was one of the most feared supervillains in L'Manberg. Yep, made total sense. That's so fucking stupid. Of course Will's not Siren, Tommy snorted. Well, you have to admit, you started mentioning Wilbur to us around the same time we saw you talking to Siren, so it just made sense, Rambu argued. Nope, I don't know who Siren is outside of the mask, Tommy told them. Huh. Weird timing then, I guess, Tubbo shrugged, although he still shot Rambu a pointed look. Tommy resisted the urge to scoff again. Of course Wilbur wasn't Siren. Sure, maybe they both had curly brown hair and liked to banter with Tommy, and maybe sometimes Siren's jokes did remind him a bit of Wilbur's, and maybe the way Wilbur slung his arm over Tommy's shoulder reminded him of Siren a little bit. No, Tommy was going to shove that out of his head. There was no way Wilbur was Siren. It's not like it was rare to find a white guy with brown hair in the city anyway. Tommy was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't even notice that Tubbo was pushing to his feet and reaching down to pull Rambu up as well, until they were both standing by the back door. We should get going now, I think, Tubbo said, pulling his mask back on. I guess we'll see you later? Yeah, I'll see you guys, Tommy replied, although the words tasted like sand in his mouth. The door clicked shut as the two of them disappeared into the alley, leaving Tommy with bloody towels and a pit in his stomach. Although he didn't regret saying no to going back home, it still felt wrong to not leave with the two of them. They were meant to be a team, and it was still difficult for Tommy to adjust to the idea that they weren't really a team at all. At least, not right now. Drink break. Also, I need to... Oof, that felt good. His head was throbbing as he stared at the harsh fluorescent lights above his head. Fatigue weighed his bones, begging him to just lay down and fall asleep on the tile floor right now. But he really didn't want to find out how Puffy would react to finding Tommy passed out next to a bunch of bloody towels in the back of her cafe. So as tempting as the idea of sleep was, he forced himself to stand so he could clean everything up. He chucked the bloody towels in the washer with the rest of the dirty rags from the day and added extra bleach before turning the machine on. Then, he threw out the used gauze, making sure to hide it underneath other trash. Lastly, he put the first aid kit away for a second time that night, and was relieved when there wasn't another knock on the door to the alley. Like usual, Tommy went out through the front of the cafe, his hands steady as he twisted the key in the lock. A breeze passed down the street, making goosebumps rise along Tommy's arms under the sweater he'd borrowed from Wilbur. They were getting further along into autumn now, and Tommy found himself hoping that Tubbo and Rambu weren't too cold in their heater-less apartment. Maybe with the extra money they saved from Tommy paying the entirety of the next 2 months' rent, they could buy extra blankets, or maybe a small space heater. Tommy remembered how last winter it had gotten so cold in their apartment, the three of them had to suck it up and pile onto the bed together in a single heap, using each other's body heat to keep from shivering while they slept. It was cramped as hell, and Tommy had definitely ended up on the floor a few times, but it had been warm. It wasn't that cold yet, though. he was sure Tubbo and Romby would be fine. As he shoved his keys into his pocket and turned to head towards the subway station, something made him pause. He wasn't sure what it was, but his eyes darted around the shadows across the street, searching for... well, he didn't know what he was searching for. A person? An animal? A scary monster from a children's book? Tommy didn't know what he was trying to see across the street, but he knew one thing. He felt like he was being watched. Finally, his eyes flickered on something white on the rooftop across from the cafe. As soon as he locked eyes on it, though, there was a flash of movement, and it was gone. Digging his nails into his palm, Tommy hurried away from the cafe as fast as he could without outright sprinting. The being watched feeling didn't go away until he climbed down into the subway station. Only once he was off the street did he stop feeling eyes bore into the back of his head, and his shoulders sagged in relief. It was probably just his own paranoia, but something in the back of his head told him that it was something more. Thankfully, the rest of his ride back to Wilbur's house didn't involve any creepy moments like that. By the time the brownstone came into view, Tommy had almost completely forgotten about the incident at all, and was instead ready to collapse on his bed under a mountain of blankets and hide there until his headache went away. Using the spare key Wilbur had given him a few days earlier, Tommy pushed open the front door and made his way into the living room. Usually, if Wilbur was home, he'd either be in his room or waiting in the living room for him. But instead of Wilbur sitting on the couch today, Techno was there in his place, idly scrolling through Netflix. For once, his hair wasn't pulled back in a bun or a braid. Right now, it was loose and hanging around his shoulders in pink waves, while his ears were still filled with the usual gold jewelry that adorned them. He didn't have any rings or necklaces on, and he seemed to be wearing pajamas. Now, this wasn't the first time Tommy had seen Techno in pajamas. He'd been living in the house for a week now, after all, but it was still rare to see the man looking so relaxed and actually just sitting in the living room watching TV. Along with that, usually Techno spent most of his time either in his room, the kitchen, or Phil's office. Tommy was pretty sure this was the first time he'd ever seen the guy pick up the TV remote. "You're home late," Techno commented, although there was no unsaid question in his voice, asking for Tommy to give him an explanation. "Was work alright?" "Yeah, it was fine," Tommy shrugged, dropping his backpack and settling on the other side of the couch. Squeezing his eyes shut, he pressed his fingers to his temples and leaned back against the cushions. "Is Will in his room?" "Nah, he and Phil are out doing work stuff right now," Techno explained, skimming through a random Netflix category, although he didn't seem very interested in any of the options. Tommy frowned. "This late at night?" "You know how it is," Techno shrugged. No, Tommy did not in fact know how it was. But there was a lot about the Soot family business that didn't seem to make sense, so he decided it was just easier not to go asking about it. "Yeah, I guess so," Tommy shrugged, wincing when the movement sent another throbbing pain through his skull. Techno frowned. "You doing okay?" "I'm fine, I just have a headache," Tommy admitted, shutting his eyes to try and ignore the faint pounding. "Let me get you some painkillers," Techno said, the couch shifting as he pushed to his feet. "Techno, I'm fine." "I'm not old like Phil. My knees can handle standing up." Techno hushed him, his footsteps fading as he headed into the kitchen. Tommy sighed and sunk deeper into the couch, the heaviness in his limbs tempting him to fall asleep right here and now. He listened as Techno moved around the kitchen, faintly clinking glasses and rattling pill bottles as he presumably got Tommy some water to wash down the pills with. A minute later, the footsteps returned, and Tommy's eyes flickered open to Techno holding a glass of water in one hand and 2 pills in his other palm. "I'm also making you some tea, so that'll be ready in a minute," Techno told him. You didn't have to do that, Tommy mumbled, taking the pills and water and quickly downing both. You look like you've had a bit of a rough night. Figured it might help. Techno shrugged before wandering back to the kitchen. Tommy frowned in the direction of Techno's turned back, before letting his eyes shut again as he waited for the medicine to kick in. While it wasn't unusual for Techno to do small things for him like this, offering him rides, making him tea or food, the two of them hadn't exactly spoken much during his week here so far. Most of their talking had been done in group conversations, not really one-on-one. Not that Tommy minded. He thought Techno was a really cool dude. Still though, he felt bad that the guy was going out of his way to make Tommy tea just because he said he had a headache. Just like me, for real. A few minutes later, Techno came back with a cup of steaming tea and placed it on the coffee table in front of Tommy. Then, he walked around to the other side of the couch and returned to his original spot. Thanks, Tech, Tommy murmured, picking up the tea to sip at it. He stared at the gold liquid that smelled of honey and peppermint, swirling it a few times absent-mindedly. Either you're thinking really hard about something right now, or you're about to fall asleep into your cup, Techno commented, raising an eyebrow at him. Tommy wanted to tell him it was fine and that he was just tired, but a part of him also wanted to say what was actually on his mind. At least a way to make up for Techno making him tea and getting him painkillers. I guess I'm sorry that I'm still here. I'm pretty sure you guys didn't invite me over thinking I'd be staying over for a week, and I promise I'll leave soon, but Wilbur told you can stay as long as you want, right? Techno asked, cutting him off. Tommy shrugged. Well, yeah, but he's Will. Plus, it's not like you and Phil signed up to live with some random kid Wilbur's friends with, so I'm gonna leave eventually for your guys' sake. Techno stared at him for a moment as if he was trying to read Tommy's thoughts, before furrowing his brows and sighing. For as chaotic as Wilbur is, he wouldn't just drag a child in here without asking us if it was okay beforehand. Not to mention, I don't like most kids. The fact that I said yes to you is like a huge compliment, Techno explained. You're here because we all like having you around, Tommy. Plus, it's not like we can't afford to feed another mouth, even if you do eat like a rabid raccoon. You say that now, Tommy muttered, keeping his eyes on his tea. But what if I stay for 2 weeks, or 3? You're gonna get tired of me eventually. Everyone does. It was a pattern Tommy was all too familiar with thanks to the foster system. The first few weeks in a new home would be generally pretty great. Everyone would be nice, trying to make him feel welcome and help him settle in. But then the novelty of having a new kid in the house would wear off, and the families would grow tired of Tommy's loud voice and impulsive words. Things would steadily get worse and worse, and eventually, Tommy would find himself packing his bags. I know you think that because of the foster system, Techno cut in, startling Tommy out of his thoughts. I was the same way. Problem kids can never stay in homes for too long, right? Shit. Tommy had forgotten Techno was a foster kid like him. Well, yeah, but I'm not saying you guys are like the foster families or anything. I'm just saying people get tired of me. Stop that, Techno said, his voice somehow both firm but gentle. You're a good kid, Tommy. This isn't a foster home where you have to pass a bunch of secret tests to find out if you'll be let into the family. We all genuinely like having you around just because we like you as a person. We're not going to get tired of you, and we all mean it when we say you can stay for as long as you want. Bringing his knees up to his chest, Tommy bit the inside of his cheek to keep his eyes from burning. He took another sip of his tea, not trusting himself to speak right now. Techno took that as permission to keep talking. I'm not, great at this social stuff, so you don't have to talk to me if you don't want to. but this had to have been brought on by something at work today. It wasn't a demand. It was an option. If Tommy wanted, he could tell Techno about seeing Tubbo and Rambu today, and maybe get his advice on that whole situation. In as vague of terms as possible, of course. Tommy started talking before he'd even made the conscious decision to do so. You know how the reason I'm here is because my roommates and I are fighting? Tommy asked, finally glancing up from his teacup. Techno nodded. Yeah? They had a secret they kept from you, and you had a secret you kept from them. It all got revealed and everything turned into a mess, right? Snorting, Tommy nodded. Yeah, it was something like that. Anyway, I haven't really talked to them since our fight, but tonight they came by the cafe, so we ended up having a bit of a talk. I'm guessing it didn't go well, Techno questioned. I wouldn't say it went badly, but no one apologized. I also asked when I was going to come home, and I told them I wasn't sure when I would, because I just feel like... He trailed off for a moment, running his finger around the edge of his teacup. I don't know. I guess I feel like I just need more time to figure out how I feel about all the secrets they kept from me and everything. Excuse me. Like, I understand why they did it, but it also hurts a lot because it was a pretty big thing they kept from me. But I don't know how... But I don't know if that just means I'm trying to avoid a confrontation. I think that was a pretty good response, Techno said, leaning back against the couch. Phil's all about healthy boundaries and being in touch with your emotions and stuff. And you recognizing that you need time to think about how you feel about everything would probably make him cry tears of joy, since it took ages for him to teach me and Will that. That made Tommy grin into his cup. Glad I can make the great Phil's a soot proud of my emotional intelligence. All the ladies love how in touch I am with my emotions, because that's how real men are. He joked, albeit in a slightly quieter voice than usual. Techno huffed in what Tommy was pretty sure was supposed to be a laugh. But seriously though, you're a smart kid for recognizing that you need some time. Don't rush yourself, just think things over. And when you're ready for you guys to have that conversation, you can let them know. Thanks, Tech, Tommy said, draining the last of his tea. That makes me feel a bit better. No problem, kid, Techno replied, shooting him a wry grin as he picked up the remote again. Now, do you have any recommendations for what I should watch? Because every time I ask Wilbur for recommendations, he just sends me really weird, pretentious art films. Eyes lighting up, Tommy made grabby hands for the remote and immediately started scrolling for the documentaries category. Oh, Techno Blade, my man. I've got the best movie for you to see. And that was how Wilbur and Phil came home to Tommy being passed out on the couch, while Techno sat completely engrossed in a documentary about polar bears. Wilbur ended up moving Tommy back to his own bed, but the next morning, Tommy and Techno spent the entirety of breakfast talking about how Steve was the best polar bear in that movie, and that he deserved only the best things. Whew. That was a good chapter. I liked that chapter. I like this story a lot. This might be one of my top fan fictions I've ever read. Although nothing can beat Passerin, you know. It's so good. I know. Now I think we're about halfway through the story now. I'm gonna be so sad when it's over. Alright. I think that is going to be the stream for today. Charlie, if you're still here, you said that you had a recommendation for who we should raid. Thank you guys so much for watching, though. Let me just do this real quick. If none of you are following my other socials, you can click that link there. And one of those links is the Discord server that I have. If you want to join that and be a part of this community a little bit more, yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing anything from Charlie about the recommended person to raid. So let me see who's live right now that I'm following. Ooh. This person's live. Let's raid them. Alright, guys. Join the raid! Whew. Thank you guys so much for watching. I don't know when I'll be live next. Especially with work. I probably won't be streaming tomorrow because I'm gonna be on an 8-hour shift. So I will see you guys next time. It'll probably either be more Tommyinnit's Clinic for Supervillains or Minecraft. Probably on the Origin server. But until then, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!